So today we are going to discuss how much Bitcoin do you need to retire in 10 years? It's one of those questions that sounds simple, and that's probably why it's so popular. People want a number: 1 Bitcoin, 2 Bitcoin, 5 Bitcoin, maybe 10. Something concrete, something they can compare themselves against, something they can write down and start aiming for. But the more I have thought about this question, the more I have come to believe that the number itself isn't actually the interesting part. Because here is what actually happens: someone decides half a Bitcoin is enough, and then they reach half a Bitcoin. Now the goal becomes one. Then they reach one. Now the goal becomes two, then five, and then 10. At some point, you start wondering whether the problem was ever the number in first place, or whether nobody ever stopped to define what enough looked like for them. And I think that's the trap. A lot of people spend years accumulating Bitcoin without ever deciding what they are accumulating it for. So let's try approaching the question from a different direction. Let's say imagine someone wants to spend $80,000 per year in retirement. Using a fair common retirement assumptions, they might need roughly 2 million invested to support that lifestyle. Now let's convert that into Bitcoin. Let's say Bitcoin reaches 500,000 per coin over the next decade. That would work out to roughly 4 Bitcoin. And that's usually where most videos stop. They tell you you need 4 Bitcoin. Problem solved. Except I don't think it is, because we haven't talked about the things that actually matter. Think about this for a second. Imagine two people both own exactly 4 Bitcoin, same stack, same asset, same number. But person A spends $50,000 per year, person B spends 200,000 per year. Who is closer to retirement? The answer seems obvious. Person A. Now let's add another layer. Person A also has a retirement account, a brokerage account, maybe even a pension. Person B has none of those things. Now the gap becomes even larger. Same stack, but completely different retirement outcomes. And I think that's where the conversation starts getting interesting. Because suddenly the Bitcoin number doesn't seem like the answer anymore. The answer was hiding in the context. And that is where I think a lot of people get stuck. Most people think they are trying to figure out how much Bitcoin is enough. But I'm not sure that's actually the right question. I think what they are trying to figure out is whether they are on track or not. Am I ahead? Am I behind? Could work become optional sooner than I think? Am I closer than I realize? Those are the questions sitting underneath the Bitcoin question. And they are usually the questions that matter the most. So, what actually determines the answer? The first thing I think is about lifestyle. Because retirement isn't really about Bitcoin, it's about funding a future version of yourself. And different lives require different amounts of money. Someone who wants to spend $40,000 per year is solving a very different problem from someone who wants to spend $200,000 per year. Bitcoin doesn't determine that, you do that. Which is why I think the most useful question isn't how much Bitcoin do I need? It's what kind of life am I trying to fund? Because once you know that, everything else starts becoming clearer. Then there is the timeline. And I think this is the part people often overlook. Let's run another thought experiment. Imagine two people both own exactly 1 Bitcoin. One is 35-year-old, the other is 60. Who is closer to retirement? Most people instinctively point to the 60-year-old, but it's not necessarily that simple. The 35-year-old might continue to work, continue investing, continue building wealth, and give Bitcoin another 20 years to compound. The 60-year-old may need their portfolio to start supporting them much sooner. Same Bitcoin, different timelines, so different answers. And that's why I think the time matters just as much as the Bitcoin itself. Then there is everything sitting next to the Bitcoin. Because for most people, Bitcoin isn't the entire picture. Some people only own Bitcoin, many don't. They have retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, real estate, businesses, pensions, cash savings. And I think this is where a lot of Bitcoin content accidentally breaks down. because it treats Bitcoin as if it exists in isolation. But that's not how people's lives work. Someone with two Bitcoin and $1 million retirement portfolio may be much closer to financial freedom than someone with five Bitcoin and nothing else. Which means understanding Bitcoin is only part of the challenge. The bigger challenge is understanding how everything fits together. Now let's run one final example. Let's keep the same retirement target, roughly 2 million, and let's look at three possible futures, not predictions, just possibilities. So the bull case, the Bitcoin reaches 1 million per coin, you will need roughly 2 Bitcoin at that time. Base case, Bitcoin reaches 500 per coin, you roughly need 4 Bitcoin. And bear case, Bitcoin reaches 250k per coin, you need roughly 8 Bitcoin. Notice what is changing. Your lifestyle didn't change, your retirement didn't change, your spending didn't change, only the assumption changed. And suddenly your Bitcoin requirement moved from 2 Bitcoin to 8 Bitcoin. Building an entire retirement plan around a single future Bitcoin price can be fragile because your future becomes dependent on a prediction. And predictions have a habit of being wrong. This is also where I think many Bitcoiners accidentally get stuck. They become incredibly good at accumulating, very few become good at planning. And those are different skills. Accumulation asks, how much more can I get? Planning asks, what would need to happen for work to become optional? Accumulation focuses on the next cycle. Planning focuses on the future you're trying to build. And eventually, every long term Bitcoiner has to make that decision. So, after all of that, where does it leave? How much Bitcoin do you need to retire in 10 years? I think the honest answer is that it depends. It depends on your spending, your timeline, your age, your expectations, your other assets. And the future you're trying to build also plays a very important part in it. So, for some people, Bitcoin will do most of the heavy lifting. For others, Bitcoin will just sit alongside traditional investments. And that's why I don't think the challenge is figuring out how much Bitcoin you need. The challenge is figuring out whether you are on track or not. Because eventually something interesting happens. Accumulation stops being the problem. You have spent years accumulating, years building. The harder problem now becomes interpretation. What does all this actually mean? Am I close? Am I far away? Those are the questions that really interest me now, because they are the questions that sit underneath almost every conversation about retirement. And if you have been wrestling with questions like that, I have put together something in the description that goes deeper into exactly those ideas. You'll find the link below. Until then, I will see you in the next video.